screw this up, but the Media Policy Initiative here at the New America Foundation, directed by Tom Glazier. Tom, are you here? Tom is in the back at the New America Foundation, and yes, Tom does fantastic work. And the New America Foundation has gone out of its way to really try to think about what the contours of new media, public policy, what's happening in journalism, what's happening in terms of trying to provide a portal into what is happening in the broad public policy sphere. This is an area that we've been trying to carve out. So my group, the American Strategy Program, appreciates very much our partnership with Tom and his team. And that is in part why we're here today. We're here to talk about new media, one of the kings of new media, Josh Marshall, in Talking Points Memo. I write a blog called The Washington Note, and I know about 3/4 of you have your own blogs you'd like to be up here talking about. And Josh, who's really the person who helped design and craft and launch my blog, I'll tell that story in a little bit, has been building an empire in New York City that looks like it's in Washington, but he's really been doing it with 2 kids and a little puppy named Simon, and it's Simon, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and his devoted partner and wife, Millette, in New York, and he's just been building this thing. It's been growing like a weed, and it's only been recently he said, you know, I've got to come back and reconnect. Could we meet a few people that you know? So that was today. Today was supposed to be a few of you, and the demand and interest was so enormous that we wanted to open this up, have some wine and beer, join us. I want to say hello to the people watching online with the Washington Note, the American Strategist, and a lot of other websites as well. So please give a warm round of applause and welcome to Josh Marshall, who heads Talking Points Media and TPM Cafe. I could go on and on and on about my relation with Josh, and I think for 2 years before my blog was launched, Josh kept saying, "Steve, you got to launch this. You got to do it," because I kept giving him all these scoops and things I was getting and didn't know what to do with. And he really is responsible. But Josh is a very brave person. When he was heading the American Prospect, I think Mark Schmidt is in the audience here. Mark currently has that role, or has the role of the DC editor of it. And you were summarily executed, right? You were fired, basically, by Bob Kuttner. We're all friends still, but you were executed at that time. There are degrees of execution.
Yeah, I mean, you know when it's the time to jump, and sometimes your choice is to jump
His
or
head
to
was
be
lopped
pushed.
off.
Yeah.
And when he was thinking about what he wanted to do, we tried to hire him here at the New America Foundation to run our Fellows Program, or to do anything he wanted to do. And he said, you have no jobs, even though we gave him no job description that we could offer him. And he sat and he starved for a long time at Starbucks. I'd see him at Starbucks getting some latte thing, and some black and white cookies were his deal, which I ended up buying a few times because you just didn't have. And you conceived the blog and built the blog out of those moments sitting at the Starbucks at Connecticut and R. So that's sort of a holy place. You know, there'll be a time 100 years from now that will say Talking Points Memo founded here at Connecticut and R. That's my version of truth. Is it pretty close?
In the broad outlines, sure.
Well, Josh, I want to thank you very much for joining us. Josh today just announced that his website, the combined TPM websites, had 79% more unique visitors in March, a total of 2.5 million, than during the same month last year, year over year. And so your blog continues to grow. I keep running into people who know you and think you and said, I don't need to think anymore because Josh does it all for me. But I guess the first question I would open with is, as you've seen your blog grow, tell us what you thought from when you began and where you are today, and how you feel about the success you've achieved.
I think it kind of breaks into 2 phases in my mind. I started it in November 2000, and through the 2004 election, I was, when I first started, I was for a brief period still at the American Prospect, and then I was sort of starving as a notional freelance writer. But I just enjoyed doing it. I liked the writing form, or the lack of form. And for those first 4 years or so, I was just sort of experimenting with it and enjoyed it so much and wanted to see what the potential was of the medium. And there were also just so many, what I thought, so many stories that were so critical and that required elucidation and explanation. And then after the 2004 election, I actually was first thinking I wasn't going to close down the blog, but I was going to sort of pull back from it and write a book totally separate from anything that
wasn't it on, like, seafaring in the 17th century or something?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it really was.
Yeah.
Well, like you're an expert on 17th century sailors.
Has a funny sound to it. Before I was,
but you are. You really are an expert on 17th century sailors.
Before I was in this line of work, I was training to be an historian. So
I
that's my specialty.
What was the title of your PhD dissertation?
Wow, I can tell you the topic. I'm not sure. I remember the
17th
title.
century sailors.
No, not sailors. It wasn't sailors. It was a very the sailors thing is bulking too large in the conversation. My dissertation was about English settlers and Indians in the middle of the 17th century in New England, and violence and economic relations between them. In any case, I was going to write this book, and then that was a point where this medium was just taking off, and a lot of other people were doing it, and it seemed to me, hopefully there'll be various times in my life when I can write a book, but there's only going to be one time in my life when things will be positioned such that I could build an organization like we've ended up building. So I threw myself back into it, and that's when we really set TPM up as a company with hiring employees and eventually an office, and to the point we are now when we have almost 20 employees, and we have our headquarters in New York and our new bureau in D.C. All four of our esteemed reporters and editors from the office are here. Thank you to them. So yeah,
we'll introduce them all later, I guess. So, but if I remember, though, when you were writing for the New Republic and the American Prospect, you were writing a lot about trade issues, a lot about foreign policy, and you were sort of the reigning expert at the time on the Foreign Agents Registration Act and all the people that were violating it. It doesn't seem like you write about those things as much anymore. Mm-hmm. Do I have it wrong? I mean, you've shifted. You've won the George Polk Prize for your incredible reporting on the attorney firing scandal. In fact, the attorney firing scandal was your baby, and there are others there. How did your gauge for what you would pursue as an authoritative writer change when you moved from sort of more traditional media into running your own show?
I think over the course of the site's history, it's been more and more focused on domestic policy. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, one of the things, as we've grown as an organization, we have our own staff of reporters. I've gone from just being a writer and reporter to, in some ways, more of a publisher than a journalist anymore. I think it's.
That means you got to make money now. Sell ads.
I'm going to make money,
all you
and I
got buyers.
Yes,
this
yes.
Is good,
This is a key opportunity. A large organization has to be run, and your responsibilities grow and everything. I think what we've always tried to do is cover the news and politics space in general, but also find a half dozen key stories that we want to really dig into. And I don't think we approach that intentionally. We don't approach that in an overly systematic way. It's sort of intuitive, and just over time, those have tended to be more domestic policy issues than foreign policy issues compared to how things were, 7 or 8 years ago.
Now, you're now a member of the White House Correspondents Association, or the Correspondents Club, or whatever they call it. You've got somebody in the White House there. I mean, you get to have a table at the White House Correspondents' dinner.
Yes.
But you also get to go to President Obama's parties, some of them anyway, where they're invited. And you went around the holidays, right? You saw President Obama, and you met him. Do I have it all sort of largely correct there?
I guess.
Did he tell you that he'd read TPM? Did he read it during the campaign?
I think one time I met him, he was nice enough to say he reads it, but I think that's more of that's a courtesy that presidents say, whether they do or not. I mean, I assume he's a pretty busy guy and has people read stuff.
So suffice it to say, you were not. I mean, I actually wrote some nice things about John McCain, and you may have too, for all I know. But to some degree, I don't think you were a big John McCain advocate on TPM.
Not recently.
Yeah, and
earlier in history,
how do you deal with writing a credible, incisive blog like yours with the amount of readership you have, and take on someone like President Obama and his failings, or take on his team and what they misstep on? There's been a lot of disappointment. I won't say overwhelming, but there's been a lot of people pleased with healthcare reform. But I mean, to avoid the disappointment about this presidency would also be a mistake. How do you deal with that? And do you pay a price for putting that out there with the folks around him that I actually do factually know pay a lot of attention to Talking Points Memo?
You know, we've just always TPM is different from what traditional news organizations were certainly 10, 20 years ago. I think it's less and less distinct as time goes by. We obviously have an editorial viewpoint on various issues, but we're about reporting and an honest and frank commentary. And that means you are constantly disappointing one segment or another of your readership. And I think it's the kind of it's really the kind of thing you have to go into it assuming that you are going to have some percentage of people constantly unhappy with you. And once you come to terms with that, it's sort of like death and taxes. Once you accept these things, life gets a little easier. Once you know that, you just sort of look at the news and report the news, and report it as accurately and as candidly as you can, and you let the chips fall where they may.
And does the White House ever send you a note saying, "Josh, we're so disappointed in you"?
Not yet. I can't. No. I don't know who hasn't told me they're disappointed in me, and often I'm sure for very good reasons. So yeah, we get all sorts of stuff like that.
So what scandals are you working on right now?
Well, I think when you're you'll know them when you see them. You don't want to tip your hand about what you're.
Is that a Holbrook line?
Reporting on at the moment.
Where do you? I mean, one of the things that I'm interested in. Steve Call, who right now is in Afghanistan as president of the American Foundation, but of course he's a staff writer at the New Yorker. He has a blog called Think Tank, and he used to run the Washington Post, essentially. And he, in my view, is trying to find ways to preserve the best aspects of old journalism. So, high quality sourcing, high quality opinion. He's the least hyperventilating guy I've ever met in my life. I mean, it's hard to get Steve shaken up on things. And sober, old quality reporting that runs through this. And I think that, I think he's very comfortable in the electronic media space. And we have partnerships with various parties. We have a partnership with Foreign Policy, a partnership with Slate Magazine. We do lots of things with various places. But I sort of in a different space than Steve. I'm ready to let it all, burn down. And to start over with a very different kind of journalism and a very different kind of thing, because I trust the sort of marketplace for the most part, of open media and communications. If I make a mistake, I get 150 emails in a second. There are just so many different ways, and there's so many more portals and cartels that have been created and cartels that have been knocked apart. And so I'm more comfortable with that space, and I'm interested in where you are. As you look 5 years ahead at where you think TPM has to go, are you going to try and make it more like a magazine, or are you going to maintain this sort of open, networked, sort of free-flow form to serious journalism?
I think we're thinking right now sort of a 3-year time horizon, and there are a couple new areas that we're going to be expanding into, other news areas that we're going to be expanding into. But I think fundamentally, I think we're going to be basically the same kind of organization 3 years from now that we are today. I think we're going to be bigger. They'll be substantially larger. I think
is larger good?
I think larger, well, depends on the context. I don't think the organization that we run today, I don't think, even if we could get it that big, we would ever want it to be as large as what people think of now as large news organizations, the big metropolitan dailies or the ones that are left, and places like that. I think probably about 3 times the size that we are right now. I think that's probably the natural size of where we'd want it to end up. But I think that there's a constant challenge for us is maintaining the kind of open networked process, sort of what you're just describing, that is what got us to this point, and I think will get us further. But obviously, as you grow, there's always tendencies towards bureaucratization, towards not being as constantly open to change about the methods and manner of presenting the news that I think you need to have in the kind of environment that we're working in today. And that doesn't mean changes. I think the fundamentals that we follow of journalism are actually, I think, people would be surprised how traditional we are in terms of just the basic stuffs of sourcing, what we consider newsworthy, what we don't. But the methods of presentation are not only radically different, but need to keep changing on an ongoing basis, because you can look at the way that the major metropolitan daily existed in a pretty stable form for 50 or 60 years. It obviously changed, but the paper that was being published in the 1980s, the New York Times or the Washington Post, if you would have brought someone forward from the 40s and 50s, they would have recognized it, the basic concept, and how it works. I don't think you're going to have that. It's not that news reporting on the web is going to hit a point in 2015, and that's going to be sort of how it is until the middle of the century. I mean, even TPM has really only existed as a company in a real sense for 4 or 5 years. Really 4 or 5 years. And even over that period of time, the change in I wouldn't even say so much technology, but the way that social networking has evolved and social media have evolved is really tremendous. And that's, as the publisher of this publication, that's really one of the things that I think of the most is remaining open to that kind of change. Because I think, one of the challenges that the journalistic profession has right now is that there's insufficient recognition. And I talk about this when I speak to journalism students. There's insufficient recognition that what we still think of as just journalism, how it is really, in a lot of ways, journalism as it made sense to exist when you were publishing once a day in a non-updatable format with a monopoly system of distribution. And if you look at, even if it's published online today, if you look at the sort of the basic A1 news story, it's a very, there's 4 or 5 genres of journalistic writing. That's one of them. And if you break it down, how's it put together? How's the lead put together? What's the story arc? How long is it? Stuff like this. And you break it down, it's all based on that 50, 60-year period of the stability of the major metropolitan daily operating in a monopoly distribution context. That's totally different now. You need to map the journalism onto the technology that's being used. And since the technology is changing so constantly, you need that kind of openness to change, or I think you just won't survive.
You know, I'm one of the unfortunate people that owned AOL stock around the time that it was merging with Time Warner. And I don't know if anybody else owned AOL Time Warner. I feel Diane Perlman, you're just as confused as I was, and somebody in the far back. And it was the idea that a fast-moving firm could move with a slow-moving big firm and somehow avoid gravity that way. Didn't work, and through arbitrage and others, I mean, it just sort of hammered that. And are you now, I mean, I just think from a business model perspective, are you this fast-growing, 79% this year over last, year, same quarter, are you going to have to find a way somehow to attach yourself to, an old line media property that has, different sorts of things, or do you think you can continue to find your way out to become an independent and truly, I guess, a truly independent and functioning firm? I know that's probably an unfair question, but I am interested. You're growing very rapidly. But when I look at the cost of advertising and what you are in, it's still far, far cheaper than say, advertising in Time Magazine or the Washington Post or any kind of comparable.
Right.
So at some point, there'll be a merger between those two. And when you bring them together, what will happen? Who will get wrecked? The old guys or the young players?
I've always, I think I like our independence. I think the staff likes our independence, although it probably feels more independent in my shoes than maybe in their shoes. But I think things are moving too quickly for I would never want to be doctrinaire or say that I know exactly what's going to happen in the future, because it's a very challenging business environment. It's a challenging journalistic environment. I mean, I've been blessed personally to be able to just work at this for the last several years, and I hope that's going to continue to be the case. But I want to keep an open mind, and luckily I have to keep an open mind. So.
Before I open the floor, let me just finish with one last question. When we, many people may not know this or remember it, but my blog, The Washington Note, sort of helped start and trigger the battle over John Bolton's confirmation vote in the Senate. And it was something that virtually no one else in the community saw as an opportunity. Most people thought as a crazy crusade. I remember when a former senior senator, who's now very important in the Obama administration, said he's an obscure bureaucrat going for a job no one cares about, and come back if you create the political space. But the process at that time, Josh and I created something called Bolton Watch. Now, that was just one of 5 different franchises you had at the time under the TPM side. But for me, I was sort of betting the house on that, betting the life savings on making this 21-month battle. What have been the times in your writing and publishing career where you bet the house on something, where everybody was telling you, Josh, you've gone too far, you're making a real mistake, you're gonna sacrifice it all? And what were those times when you were betting the house on making this work?
I think starting the site was what reminds me most of what you're describing, or when I had those kind of conversations with people. I think the reporting that we did on Social Security in 2005 certainly...
Tell people about that, because this was about privatization.
Yeah, and then President Bush was making a push to privatize Social Security, and that was really the focus of the site for 4 or 5 months.
And you went out to savage Democrats. You did savage
I
Democrats.
went out to clarify things.
Yes.
But
they felt savaged.
Some of them. Personal experiences, or everybody has their own. I thought it was a very important story, and really what I was focusing on was, I think that one of the things that gets lost a lot in political reporting is you'll see reporters talk about, there aren't enough of this kind of representatives on the Hill to do X, or there are too many senators want to do that or don't want to do this. And I think that makes that is true as far as it goes, but it leaves ordinary people having no idea where to grab on. Who's where? Who are the problems? Who do I talk to? So our coverage then was basically to get down to the details. and say where the pressure points were on both sides, because I thought that was where the conventional journalism was really failing. With the U.S. Attorney scandal, we had a few months there of people thinking we were crying wolf and taking, some obscure and ambiguous things and making too big a deal out of it, or going way too far out on a limb that was gonna break on us. And I think in most cases like that, and I think almost every journalist would have similar experiences. All you have as a reporter, since it's an inherently adversarial position and line of work, you don't, whatever you need to uncover, someone doesn't want you to uncover. So it's you never have the people you're covering saying like, perfect, you're right, you're doing it just right. That doesn't happen. So all you really ever have to go on is your gut. And that's what we did, and it ended up that there was, I was going to say it was an even bigger story than we thought it was, but I'm honestly not sure that's true. I think we thought it was a pretty big story.
So you stopped Social Security privatization. You gave Alberto Gonzales and Karl Rove a really, really bad time. You were also very involved, if I remember correctly, in the Valerie Plame sort of reporting. Duke Cunningham was another giant one, that scandal. And you cost Trent Lott his spacious office when he was Republican Majority Leader, and got him sort of bounced out of that. You forced his resignation. Do you think, just finally,
I'm not stipulating to all responsibility for all this, just in case.
Yeah, but people allege that you caused all those things. So, I guess the real issue today is: do you think that you're going to have those sorts of opportunities in the Obama era, or do you find it harder to get access to those stories, or do you find that you would be crossing a political line because these were largely happening in a Republican-controlled Senate and House and a Republican executive branch. And today we have the reverse. So how do you, as a publisher in your world with what's considered to be a progressive media property, deal with this crowd?
I don't see it as a problem, because I think the people who have followed the site closely know from experience that I'm just as happy turning a scandal. Yeah, because
Harry Reid.
I think there's really two aspects of it. As a journalist, you feel like you have civic responsibilities, and there's also just it's what you do to uncover stories, and it wouldn't be. I wouldn't enjoy doing it if that's what if that wasn't what we were about.
Well, thank you. Let me open the floor now. We've got somebody with a microphone. Andrew will run around, but would love to involve all of you in this conversation. So let's take right here in the middle.
Yeah, Bruce Bartlett. I'm curious about where you sort of position yourself or see your niche as between some of your quote-unquote competitors. And I was just wondering if you talk a little bit about what you think some of the strengths and weaknesses are of things like Huffington Post, ProPublica,
great
Politico,
question.
whatever you view as your competition.
The Washington Note.
That's one of those really good questions that actually puts me in an awkward position.
You're supposed to say you're better than them.
I know that's what I'm supposed to say. I think ProPublica is really fundamentally different than we are, and that each of them are. They're one thing, they're a nonprofit, obviously, and they're not playing in the same kind of media ecosystem that we are. So I think kind of fundamentally they're in a different place. Huffington and Politico, in editorial terms, I see those as those are the two publications that I kind of think of as our competition. I think the nature of the space we're all in is one where there's sort of I don't see it as competition over scarcity. I think there's plenty of room to go around. I think that That's too good a question. Huffington is very different from us. They're playing in a lot of different places than we are. I think their DC bureau is very good. I think Sam Stein, Ryan Grimm are great reporters. I think I think the thing that sets us apart fundamentally from both of them is that we have a kind of iterative reporting style that I think allows us to engage our readers in a deeper way, and I mean this in a very specific sense, to get engagement from them and have them help in the process of our reporting. And I think that is one of the things that enables us to compete with both of them, even though we're smaller than both. And a lot of that is just the way that we came into existence as an organization. I mean, Politico is, Politico I think is, and I think they would probably agree, is a more traditional news organization than I think a lot of people think. I mean, people think, you're on the web. Obviously, they have a physical edition in D.C., but people around the country know them as on the web. But I think they're, again, in a lot of good ways, a very traditional organization. What I already said about Huffington, but I think that's what's distinct about us. Again, that iterative style of reporting that brings the readership more into the process and allows us to break more. They talk about in military terms punching over your weight. Allows us to do that. But those are the two other. Those are certainly the two other players that I wake up in the middle of the night and think about how can we do better than them and beat them here or there.
Cool. Chris Nelson. I should say that while he may not wake up in the middle of the night of the Washington Note, I do publish a lot of my stuff on TPM. So he's co-opted me.
That's right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Josh. It's great to see you.
Great to see you.
Come to D.C. more often.
I'm going to try.
That's what this is all about.
Right.
This is creating the new trend.
I wanted to build on the answer you just gave because it was what I wanted to ask about. Who reads you and why? One of the things that I've really noticed in the last few years doing my own thing is people are desperate for mediation. They want to know the facts, but they want to know what the hell does it mean? Who do I believe? Who's crazy? Who isn't? Are you finding that that's what people are turning to you for more and more? Do you think there's not a risk exactly, but if you go more in the mediation game, you get away from the news that requires the mediation? And do you happen to know? Do you have stats on? Do people read you and Huffington, and or do you find that people tend to find you and then rely on you and not look at not the competition so much, but the other sources to see what else they need to know?
Thanks.
As you'd imagine, there's a lot of overlap between our readers and Huffington Post readers, Politico's readership. I mean, obviously, Politico is obviously very big in D.C., but there's more of a concentration in D.C. versus the rest of the country. As any news organization does on the publishing side, we have all the different details and demographic information about our audience. I think what draws people to TPM, one basic thing is trust, and any good news organization has to have that to sustain readers. I think that we provide a kind of coverage that mixes aggregation, and that's kind of what you're talking about, bringing everything together, providing context, trying to explain to readers what it means. Often what we're doing is narrating a story across a number of different publications. And that's still what a lot of the daily papers, since you're not going to read on the front page of the Times an article that describes what three other media organizations are doing with a story. So one of the things we do is, again, we're fine saying they broke this and these people broke that and we broke this and here's how it all fits together. There's that narration of the broad story that people think they can come to us for that kind of context and sort of macro understanding. What we also bring to the table is a lot of really traditional shoe leather reporting. And unlike a lot of other publications, we're not afraid to get into it with our readers and showing them the kind of the nitty-gritty facts of what is actually happening with the story. So I think those two things, both the ability to look really close, to zoom in really close, and also to draw back and narrate the whole story. I mean, we obviously have a big national audience. We have a very big audience in D.C. There's all the details about the demographic information. They tend to be people who are very engaged, people who are influentials themselves, people in the media, people in government. That's kind of a cross-section of who they are. The people who take news really seriously and are really into it. And they're often people who, because of that, other people rely on to find their news from. And that's actually been one of the ways that we've been able to grow our audience as quickly as we have, is that our readers are people who are influential with the people around them and in their lines of work, etc., to start with. So that's who reads us. I think that's basically why. But again, the one thing that cuts across a newspaper someone would have been running 100 years ago and today, getting facts right and establishing trust with readers is what's essential and what you can never lose.
What's been your worst mistake?
Do we know about?
That's a good caveat. I mean, let me think.
While you think of it, who else? Over here in the side room, we'll come up here. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, thanks.
Well, wait till he answers. I'm not going to let him off yet.
No, I think there's a lot of stuff that we got right in the coverage of the banking crisis a year and more ago, and obviously going on. I think I'm not sure it's wrong. I think I overstated the degree to which it would be necessary to take some of the major banks into some sort of receivership. It certainly seemed to me that would be necessary. And I also think that I greatly underestimated the speed at which a lot of the major banks would be able to, pay back their TARP loans. So I think, I could come up with 100 others, but I think over the last year or so, I think that's the thing I look back on and say, I don't think I had that quite right.
Interesting. Yes, in the back.
Andrew Albertson, thanks for your comments. Thanks for this conversation between the two of you. I'd just be interested to know if you've seen any models in other countries that are interesting to point to or that you've learned from, where we're seeing online political journalism, or even more interesting, this sort of, as you put it, this iterative journalism that gives the readers an opportunity to engage, to get involved, to hook, to, almost an opportunity for advocacy also.
I really have to plead ignorance on that question. I've at various points I've had people point me to different publications, and keeping this publication running is so many multiples of full-time jobs that I haven't been able to learn as much about what a lot of other people are doing and organizations are doing.
Do you have an assistant yet?
No.
I mean, I just asked this because I've known Josh for a long time. I've never gone through an assistant. I mean, I don't need to go through an assistant to get to you, but I mean, you're still a hard guy to reach. I mean, you still have no one managing the world, ringing on your doorbell and say, we would like to, we're from Australia, or we're from Ramallah, and we want to come talk to you about blogging. What do you just ignore those calls?
No. Well, I'm sure you can probably find some people who say that happened, but it's
no, it's not a bad thing. It happens.
Yeah.
I'm just sort of interested in the fact that you're still running a small, kind of.
I think one of the things, and everybody who works for TPM will attest to this. We work very hard. We do a lot with a fairly small team, and that's really my focus. And because of that, there's a lot of conferences abroad and other other models that people are experimenting with that I would love to know more about, but I don't have the time to dip into it.
Susan, did you have a question? Right here and then up in the front.
Hi, my name is Gilkich. I'm just a normal person. I
The
thought
best.
going
You're
back,
a reader, right? You're a
it's
reader.
a scary part. Exactly. I'm a reader. I'm literate. I wanted to go back to not literal. I wanted to go back to Steve's question when Steve was asking about what it was like to get the whole into the White House correspondence thing. I thought his question was going to be if you had met the Salahis. And the reason I ask this, I'm only half teasing. We all know what she looked like and that whole thing, but. Actually, I raised this question because it gets at something I wanted to think about in terms of values, the kind of values you're operating with, and the pressures. Both of you could answer this in some ways. The pressures when you're dealing in this whole new social media online world. Because there is this kind of celebrification aspect, right? The Salahis, we all laugh, but the fact is
They
we
might
all
be
laugh
here. Are
knowingly.
the Salahis here?
What? They could be here, but we laugh knowingly, and there was there was an interesting intersection of celebrity and politics and all of that at the same time about that incident that says something, it seems to me, about the sort of challenges of that whole world. So there's both a commercial celebrity aspect, and there's also a kind of monetization aspect to it, which is kind of the whole monetization of politics and access,
Right.
which is also the world you're dealing in, right? Because you need access, but now it's becoming, it seems, increasingly about the money. So politicians writing books or looking themselves to their blog or looking down the road to what kind of access can you get me? And that seems to me to be, brand Palin. That's another kind of complicated challenge, it seems to me, in this whole values, social media, politics, policy, etc. So I guess I'm sort of curious about how you think about while wearing your journalism hat. Both of you.
I'm not. I don't mean this flippantly. I'm not completely sure I understand the question.
He's asking you what you think about what celebrity journalism, celebrity access, the celebrity dimensions of Hollywood in politics is doing. And since you said both of us, what I will just add, I wrote about this week. James Fallows and others picked up on it, where I talked about White House communications corruption. Maybe corruption is the wrong word, and I certainly don't think it's endemic to this administration. But when you see an article written by Edward Luce about foreign policy and the decision-making structure of the White House, which by all accounts of any insider or anyone in it is a incredibly lucid and was a very well done and well-reported article, and because I've seen the emails, the barrage of pummeling that he took from White House communications and other staff after that, because they've become used to fluff stories. And the fluff stories, some of them, are written by people who want to maintain access to the White House or who have book contracts. And that's not the only rationale. There are many. But it does seem to me that the kind of high-quality journalism that I think Josh does, that I try and do, the White House is the White House. I think it ought to be different. I wrote pleasantly about a Maureen Dowd party, and I had 19,000 Maureen Dowd haters let me know their view on that. And I do want to go back to Maureen Dowd's house, but that wasn't why I said I enjoyed it so much. But you do, if you fall into certain grooves of being overly obsequious to power, when your role in part as a privileged person that has White House access is to report on the things they're not feeding you, you see that being distorted. And when I wrote my piece, I think the White House Correspondents Association would do very well for itself if it talked about best practices, talked about these book contracts of insiders that are setting aside material that they don't want to send to us today. And I think that the White House itself has a role, and I understand they want fluff stories written about the initiatives they're doing. But after the fact, after that story is written, there ought to be a best practices on their page that you don't pummel Ed Luce, who's now on record on this. So I can mention him, but there are many others. And so I would simply say that in the last comment I would make, James Fallows, who was our former chairman, member of our board, well-known Atlantic Monthly correspondent, wrote a fantastic book that I think deserves its place today that was ignored, called breaking the news. But it was breaking, B-R-E-A-K-I-N-G, in the sense of butchering the news in terms of looking at celebrity journalism and what it was doing to distort the kind of ethical equilibrium, I think, that used to exist. I think it's a very important question, but that was my long foray into whatever you think.
I guess I would say, I mean, there's reporting the news, I mean, especially about a city like Washington that is so rife with corruption of various kinds. That
I call it seduction, but
that even the best people in this city, and not just in this city, but in the sort of the metaphorical city of Washington around the country, can't help but be involved in, and we see that in 100 different ways. I think I would say two things. One thing about TPM is I've never wanted us to be above publishing about stories about politicians that people are interested in finding out more about them. I've never wanted to run an eat your spinach kind of news organization. There are a lot of stories, and this is one of these many things that we get criticized about. Oh, this is too tabloidy, or this isn't meaty enough. It's not like when you were doing.
What's a good tabloid story you did? I'm interested.
Well, we get judged on a certain curve. The stuff we do about Sarah Palin, or various kind of about a bunch of different stuff. I guess the point is that I don't think we want to find. We don't think reading the news is a civic chore. It's something that news is interesting. And politics is interesting because a lot of it is about life. And I've never wanted us to be afraid to dig into stories that we find interesting, even if they don't meet someone's standard of the most serious stories. On the other point about all of the conflicts that you have to balance kind of constantly as a journalist, and now myself as a publisher too, what I always think in terms of, and I try to tell our reporters, is about a fundamental honesty with your readers, and it's a very clarifying principle that can steer you to the right place in all sorts of different in all sorts of places of potential conflict, and that's what we try to do. And basically, for covering a lot of what we do is covering Washington D.C. We have a very big audience here, and we're trying to provide the best coverage of this city of any publication operating here. And we are trying to explain the most, make things as concrete enough and detailed for our readership. Just provide the best coverage, have the best publication covering this city there is. And sometimes we succeed in that, sometimes we don't. I think we do more often than not. But that is our focus, and we try to make sure all of those questions are serving that goal.
Tim Ford right here in the front. I asked Josh last night, if he actually got where he got most of his great stuff, and he said our tip site, people writing in and just giving things that are hidden in the bureaucracy. There's a very well-connected crowd here in town, so I would recommend those of you who are really into this, push that little tip button, not money, but scoops for Josh. But yes.
I'm Tim Ford. I'm not going to say whether I've hit that tip line before or not, get myself in trouble. But I did want to ask you, two of your responses alluded to the role that readers have in helping you fulfill the mission you've established for TPM. And I think that's really interesting, particularly the times when you've had these Washington Friday afternoon document dumps, and you've actually pulled hundreds, maybe thousands of readers into the process of sorting through those kinds of things and finding out whether there's news there for folks. I two-part question. One, the first time you ever thought to do that, And having now done it a couple of times, it looks like quite successfully. Do you have thoughts about what the future of that kind of project or enterprise might be?
Yeah, three things. I don't think there was a first time per se that it really, over the first few years of the site, it just sort of happened in an organic way. I think what people think in terms of often is during the U.S. Attorney scandal, when these kind of episodic dumps were coming out, and I think and maybe Paul Keels, who a former reporter of ours who now works at ProPublica, could refresh me. I think we had this was a point that basically Paul and I were reporting as a team that story, and he gets insufficient credit as really the co-reporter on that story. I think there was one of these document dumps, and we went through it, and we'd put in a long week. We didn't have a weekend staff, and I think I said, "Listen, why don't we put it out there, and just have people go through it, and we'll kind of check in over the weekend and see how it's going." So I think it was necessity is the mother of invention.
So you put the documents out, and then you told your readers to come back and tell you what was in them?
Well, the documents were public. We sort of set up a framework where people could go through in a systematic way, find things that they thought that we should look at more closely, and then we would do it.
And you'd get the credit, and they did
exactly,
the work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was an organized way to get credit for other people's work. Right. I think
recurring returns without recurring effort.
Right.
I like
exactly.
that. Yeah.
What we're working on now is we're developing some new applications that we think will help us kind of automate that process without giving too much away. It would be nice to have the ability to have various kind of public records be put into the public domain, and if you're a reader, that you could go and sort of highlight in the way that some programs let you do, kind of draw a little circle around this, and then we can see that, but then other readers can look at it and people can say, this is meaningless, or this is the kind of things. These aren't.
So it's TPM cloud computing.
Something like that. I think. Look, these are things we all know about ratings that site has. Kind of you liked this, you didn't like this. So in some sense, it's pretty. We're taking concepts that are pretty basic in social media, and we're trying to find ways to sort of customize that to our work and the way that our readers work with us on a lot of these projects.
Susan Eisenhower.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here. I have sort of a complicated question, so I'm trying to figure out exactly how to articulate this. But it seems to me that one of the big changes about the internet and blogs and tweeting and twittering and doing all those things is it brings...
You Twitter, Susan?
No, I don't. This actually gets to the point of my question, is that everything becomes even more instantaneous than it used to be. Now, it seems to me as an American, if there's anything that's really driving the train wreck or the coming train wreck here, is the fact that we can't think beyond immediate imperatives. And those would be getting the scoop, being competitive with your other websites and the rest of it. When you think about the dimension of time and your responsibility as an American, or maybe I should say a journalist and an American, whichever order you want to put those in, what is your arc of time? When you try to alert and talk to your readers in a trustful way, what is the arc of your time that you're trying to frame?
Can I piggyback on this?
Yes.
When Susan Eisenhower quit the Republican Party, right? She did.
Yes, I did.
And she did it by way of an article in the journal National Interest. And I then took it and put it on the blog. Had I been there in the room, I would have tweeted it, and it would have gone out to thousands of people. So, I mean, I think it's interesting to look. You were using an old-fashioned, old-style way of putting it out there, and you were worried about anybody getting it before it was out in publication. I think that's accurate, because we talked about it. Then it went in the blog. But it would be interesting. So I want to add the arc of time to sort of how you would look at media for important moments. Susan Eisenhower's defection was pretty significant, you know, at the
defection,
time.
That's such
so I just want to add.
Well,
I think my answer would be that we are operating at a number of different time arcs simultaneously. A lot of what we do is down to the minutes, literally. In this sort of final round of the healthcare ongoing battle, one of what turned out to be one of the most popular features we've ever had was Healthcare Reform Wire. Then I think it was eventually Countdown to Reform Wire. It was a section of the site that we dedicated to sometimes minute by minute updates on the whole story. And that is something where this member of Congress just said this back in the district. Brian Beutler, who was our lead reporter on healthcare reform, just talked to this senator, and that's what they said. This new poll came out. So kind of a profusion of information where the reason that people find it so addictive is precisely because they want to keep going back every 10 minutes because the big picture seemed so important and they didn't want to be behind at all. And in the context that we were talking about before, competing with competitor publications, sure, we want to get the story first, all those kind of traditional journalistic pressures that, as you say, is even faster now because you can, if you go 25 years ago or say back into the Watergate era, those big decisions that the editors and publishers, the Times and the Post had to make about publishing certain stuff, still you're talking about, take a few days, let's sit on this, and not worry about some website's going to do it first. So we definitely live in that world. What we're also trying to do is constantly be stepping back and putting all of this, a lot of it's sort of like a Jackson Pollock painting. There's just these arcs of paint being put up on the wall that look kind of neat sometimes, but very hard to, put it all together. We're constantly trying to draw back, and that's one of the things that I personally tend to focus on now, since I don't do as much of the moment-to-moment beat reporting that our reporters do, to draw back and try to think about not just what's the latest fact or nugget of information that's come forward, which is what we try to be better at than anybody, but what does the whole arc tell us? What just happened here with this healthcare reform legislation? Because to a certain extent, who cares if the Democrats do or don't get slaughtered because of it in November? That's not really going to matter that much in any kind of long-term context. Elections come and go, and the Democrats got slaughtered in '94, and the Republicans got slaughtered in 2006. But in the big picture, in terms of the structure of the American state, the future of provision of health care, what does this mean? How significant of it is it? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? So I think, and this is it's a big challenge for us. I think it's a big challenge for any publication working today, because to a great degree, you have individual people who have to be working on very different time arcs in the same brain at the same time. But that's what we're constantly trying to do that, and I think that's the way we'd like to be judged.
I want to go to Lori Rubner next, but when you stopped writing, I mean, you used to package in 3 or 4 words what would take me basically a couple of pages to write, and still does. When you began pulling back from that role, I remember Rick Hertzberg of the New Yorker, Talk of the Town, telling me that he stopped, that he never really knew what he thought until he began reading you, and then it all became clear that you were the portal for which he was looking at life.
It's an honor for him.
And Rick is a good friend, but he was being totally honest and sincere. When you began having someone else create that portal for Rick Hertzberg to think what he thought, did Hertzberg say, this doesn't sound like you?
I haven't talked to Rick about it, so I can't tell you specifically.
Should we call him?
No.
Did others begin noticing it, or were you able to maintain your shtick in how you framed? Short, pithy.
I think as we've grown at various points, I've had to be more involved on the publishing and business side of the operation, because there's just a great deal that needs to be done. I keep, with some exceptions, I keep pretty deeply editorial involved on a day-to-day basis in what we do, and I still try to keep in regular touch with our readership and what we're doing through what we now call the editor's blog, which used to be just TPM. So I sometimes wish I could do more of it than I do, but I still keep a very close touch on it, and you know, the imprint of my direction, I think, is there on a day-to-day basis. I think we've been very protective of the voice in the main blog, and my partner David Kurtz, who now runs our DC bureau.
David's here.
Sort of blogs with me in the main blog, and that's only because I trust his judgment so much and the quality of his writing, that, and we see things, see a lot of things similar. So I think you know, it's a challenge growing an organization like we have, and I sometimes think that, you know, I had a lot more time to write when we were sitting in that Starbucks and sort of, you know, and I was you know, kind of,
You know, I thought of buying that chair from them when they threw it away. So
okay.
I want to go to Lori Rubner.
But that's my answer.
Lori. Where's Lori?
Hi, I'm actually Steve. Sorry, the light's probably a little bit in your face. I'm Christina Larson. I'm a fellow here and also an editor at Foreign Policy. And I remember Josh back in the days when he was on the masthead as a contributing editor at Washington Monthly Magazine. Those were the Starbucks days, and actually even the pre-Starbucks days, I think. A question.
That was the Washington Monthly funding the Starbucks coffee days.
You know, some secrets we're keeping from the junior staffers. So I had a question. I'm now an editor at Foreign Policy, and we obviously work in a different space, but somewhat similar challenges, trying to sort of create a vibrant organization in a new space, you know. And I wonder, as you're looking forward to your 3-year planning, what are your sort of unknowns? The either financial market realities, readers' tastes, political realities, technological changes or disruptions, the things in your planning that you've identified that you aren't really sure about, but you're wondering which way they'll go.
In about 45 seconds.
A lot of technological unknowns, you know, unknowns. Like, sort of as I was saying before, we've been very successful with social media propagation of our stories over the last year. But I think going back like 18 months, we were definitely like, wow, you know, 6 months ago we were sort of like at the cutting edge of viral distribution of news, and there's this whole thing, and we didn't even notice this. We need to get on top of it. So I think that's a big thing. The business side of the journalism profession is obviously in tremendous flux. There's all sorts of questions about what kinds of advertising traditional advertisers will want to purchase. I think that we're putting a great deal of effort into thinking through ways to, because that's the main way that we make money and support what we do, sell paid advertising. Finding ways to do that work, that are consistent with our editorial integrity, but are creative enough to you know, entice advertisers to want to buy. And at the moment, we're doing, I think, a very good job at that. But on both of these fronts, we are trying to keep very open minds and trying to constantly be experimenting. What I tell reporters who work for me sometimes is that I think the best thing a reporter has is a healthy sense of paranoia. And I don't mean that about buying into conspiracy theories. What I mean is, what's the way I didn't think of that I got this story wrong before I hit send? Because the obvious ways not to get things wrong are the obvious ways. And people get things wrong because it wasn't the obvious way to screw up that you missed. So there's always that, when we're publishing a big story, kind of like, wait a second. What's the way that we didn't think of where this is wrong and we're going to regret this? And I think we try to bring that. Always keeping our eyes open and always trying to think of what is it we didn't think of to the publishing and business sides of what we do. Because look, it's a very, knock wood, we've been very successful so far, but I know the space well enough, and I've seen a lot of great organization and really bright people make big mistakes on sort of direction of new media companies, that I don't think anything is guaranteed for anybody. So we're trying to keep really alert and trying to be open to and aware of the changes as they come, and not to wake up and say, "Wow, we missed that a year ago, and I wish we wouldn't have."
Guys, I know we still have drinks in the back, right? And Washington knows how much I love cocktail parties. So we're going to go back to that in a moment. But I want to grab this gentleman in the very back, and then Caitlin in the front. We're going to just cluster your two questions. Is that Mark McCarthy? Yes. Okay, good. I'm pretty blind, but somehow yeah. So and he'll answer both of you, and then we're going to break. So Mark, go ahead.
Question on the future of the news. What do you think about paywalls as a way of responding to the economic crisis in news production?
Payrolls?
Paywalls.
Okay, and let's come up to Caitlin real quick.
Payrolls also create a crisis in economic.
Payrolls create. You can answer both here together.
Hi, Caitlin Antrim. I'm interested in how you had to discover ways to make a living off of this and then to maintain your staff. And I was interested in how looking for those revenue streams, not how it affects your reporting, because I've never had a question of that, but how it affected the structure of TPM and with forming Muckraker, for forming the coffee houses, that era when you went through to set up a structure beyond just your single-person newsletter, and how it might have grown out of wanting to go to New Hampshire and putting out a call for people to support you.
Right.
To the first
question. Did you donate? Okay.
Come to collect. To the first question, I think there are certain specialized kinds of news where paywalls are realistic. I think Bloomberg, not the mass Bloomberg news agency, but what used to be Bloomberg, kind of very specific kinds of economic data, that's in a different space, and I think that works. I don't think in most cases paywalls are realistic for broad spectrum news producers. That's not because I wish it were that way. I would love to have everybody who's now reading the site sign up and send us money, and I just don't think that's. I don't think, at least in the current environment, that's realistic. I mean, more power to people who think they can do it. I don't think it makes sense. I think that what can work, and we're planning to do probably this summer, is we're planning to introduce a membership program. This would leave all of our reporting just as available to everybody who wants to read it as it is right now. But there's a core readership who would be interested in more functionality on the site, extras that we don't think would appeal to the sort of the mass audience that we have. But again, a small group of people who are really into the site and would be willing to pay pretty small amount of money for basically a kind of a deeper experience of the site, more options, stuff like that. So I think that you'll see, especially for sites like ours, more doing stuff like that. But fundamentally, I certainly don't think they're realistic for us, either on a publishing from a publishing standpoint, also even more so on an editorial standpoint. Because as I said before, we're so reliant on readers as a core part of our editorial process that if we went down, even if we decided that we could make it work or that it would make us more money in business terms, if we said, okay, we're going to go from 2.5 million people a month and make more money shutting it down and having 50,000 people as paid readers, that would be slitting our own throat on the editorial side because we're gaining so much being able to access information from that larger readership. To your question, the initial growth of the site,
chaotic.
Well, we had there were no investors who invested in the site and gave us the seed money to grow it. So we did it. We got our first sort of bootstraps up from readers who we would go to them and say, we want to start this new site. The TPM Muckraker site was actually the second, but sort of the model. You send us $10, and we think if enough of you send us a small amount of money, we can make this work for a year, and after a year, it'll fund itself. And in the cases we did that, it worked. As things have gotten bigger, the audience has gotten bigger. It's a larger organization. We are pretty much 100% paid advertising now. I think you have journalistic goals as what you're trying to accomplish. You have to find the vehicles to meet those goals. You have to find realistic business models and ways to come up with the funds. So it's affected things in various ways. And I think there are many ways in which having to find those business models actually can help the journalism, because it's very easy to get lost in your own little interests. And if you wake up and say, like, wow, now it's just me, and all those people who were reading before are gone, that means something. That's not a failure on their part. It's a failure on your part. So the need to build a mass audience, to maintain their attention, isn't just a business need. It's something that I think also keeps you honest on the editorial and publishing front, because your readers are your judges, fundamentally.
I recently began running again every day, and I wear an old shirt that I bought from Cafe Press, which says TalkingPointsMemo.com on the front. And do you still sell there?
I think
it's the only. I'm probably the only one who bought the shirt because people didn't know about it. Maybe they haven't have them.
We have some. We have
always
some
uncovering something. And in those days, what was clear to me and why Josh is so important, and there are many bloggers here, people who are interested in this in the way, I think, whether it's Chris Nelson or myself or some others here, Henry Farrell and others, you look at this as an opportunity to do something that the rest of the marketplace is not doing. And also, when I remember with America Abroad, the Bolton Watch, we were essentially also challenging the cartels that are embedded in the American publishing industry, whether they're in broadcast journalism, or whether it's our friend David Shipley at the New York Times or Fred Hyatt at the Washington Post. There are these control valves on opinion. And it just became very clear to me when I watched Josh go from operating in the New Republic and the American Prospect and other places where he was, still quite famous and still getting zinger stories that some of us were helping to inform informally. But you just saw this order of magnitude change in what he was doing as a single operator. And I think he inspired a great number of us to get into a field we would not have gotten into had we not followed by his example, to essentially greatly diffuse the opportunities to do high-quality journalism, punditry, commentary. And I'm so glad that many of you were able to join us. I'm really grateful to Josh Marshall for making us the punctuation point in his beginning to come back to Washington more. That's what he's promised. So let's go have a drink, but please join me in giving our thanks and a round of applause to Josh Marshall.